We're very excited about the 3.5-year project to place the first African-American monument on the Capitol. And we use it as yeast and a catalyst for this conversation. Now, we have a little short Instagram that I like to show you all. It was created for us by our artists, the very brilliant Becky Alt and the team from the Arts Research Foundry. And if you can show that little Instagram clip, I would appreciate it.
Sorry, just one moment.
Not a problem. We are very excited that this year's series is being co-hosted and co-sponsored by our colleagues and friends from the Dauphin County Library System. And here we go. This is an Instagram of the process of applying patinas to the bronze statues. You can see the bronze color changing as the patinas are added by painting with fire. Here comes the second statue, which is Jacob Compton. And thank you. I love to show that because while that took 15 seconds, that process of the patina actually took 8 months to do. So we got a chance to see their art. We've got quite an interesting collaboration of panelists with us today. And I'd like to start by introducing Joycelyn Pickens from Senator Casey's office, who will be talking about a unique initiative for the Gettysburg Battlefield. Welcome, ma'am. And you just have to, yes.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Let me know if I have any more audio issues, but thank you for inviting me again, Lenwood. I really appreciate giving me the platform to talk about Senator Casey's initiative. And again, I appreciate all of the work that you all are doing in this space to represent the role that African Americans have played in our country's history. And that's really what the senator is hoping to do with this work. So we are currently working on a bill related to the Gettysburg National Military Park. So I currently handle public lands in the office, and I also work on issues related to environmental justice. And so talking about Gettysburg National Military Park, of course, there's going to be a mention of Confederate monuments there. We know that there are more than 1,300 monuments, and of those, there are 40 that memorialize Confederate soldiers, but there is not a single statue, there's not a plaque, there is nothing on the park that signifies or acknowledges the role of an African-American freedmen in the region, any of their roles in the Battle of Gettysburg or in the Civil War. So of course, you know, you have the visitor center, but on the actual battlefield, there is not anything that mentions their role. And so we think that that is a complete waste of opportunity for the millions of folks who come to that park every year. Is such an educational resource for not only Pennsylvanians, but folks across the country who come to the park. And so we are working on a bill that would authorize the National Park Service to work with the committee. So right now, Gettysburg National Park, they have an advisory committee that is made up of local officials. They have community members and whatnot. but we would like that advisory committee to also consult with a board of technical advisors, including historians, art historians. We have folks such as Scott Hancock at Gettysburg College, who is a Civil War and African-American historian. He has been heavily involved in this process and helping us, as well as Glenwood, Jenny Dumont, Janet Riggs. They've been intricately involved in helping us with this proposal, and we have the intent of making sure that Gettysburg is able to have this board of folks like Dr. Hancock and others who know what it means to create some sort of representation at Gettysburg that's meaningful and that's created with intent and involvement of the community. So we are hoping to be able to introduce that in the next couple of weeks, so definitely be on the lookout for that. And of course, feel free to reach out to our office, kc.senate.gov. You can find our contact information if you have any questions or comments or anything like that. But ultimately, we are just hoping to use the resource of this national park to be able to show that there is more to the history than that's currently being shown, which we think is an important part of what you all are already doing, or what the Pennsylvania Monuments Project is already doing.
So I think that this is a very interesting concept, because the goal or concept is to show African Americans who were at Gettysburg in roles other than in uniformed soldiers, both on the Union and the Confederate side. Correct? Is that still the concept?
So that's not necessarily the concept. So the way that we've designed the bill so far is that we intend to have the technical advisors work together to decide what that representation should look like. There have been proposals that want there to be maybe representation of Union side, Confederate side, but we think that ultimately it should be folks who know this issue and folks who really are engaged in the community. I mean, there's so many resources in Gettysburg and throughout the Commonwealth who would know what it means to have someone who's representative of, or to have artwork that is representative, commemorative work. So I don't think it makes sense to say, oh, we'll just have someone who maybe was a supportive laborer who was forced to work on the Confederacy, a statue of them there. I don't think that that would be our thinking at all, but if that is what the technical advisors, if they think there is a way to acknowledge that there are folks who were forced into this role and that this needs to be part of the story, of course that is critical, and if there's a way to show that, we leave that to them to decide. But ultimately, our hope with this initiative is that we're going to put the leaders and the artists and the conservationists in the lead, and we just want to have Congress do the role of authorizing the work and providing the funds to do so that we can get this work done that should have been done a long time ago.
So walk us through that, the Congress's role. What is the process of the bill, the authorization and the bill? And three questions, if you will. What is the process of it becoming a bill? What can the public do to assist in that process? And how can we follow the progress of the bill?
Absolutely. So process of it becoming a bill. So we are currently working with lawyers in the Senate to draft up the text, to basically, in order to create anything on the national park, Congress has to authorize that to allow any sort of commemorative works to be placed onto a national park. So that's why Congress has to do this. And so we're working with lawyers to write out that legal language. And then we're also putting in language in there that's saying why we're doing this in the first place. And then two, what can you do to track it and to show your support? Well, as soon as we've introduced this bill, we'll have a press release. The senator will be talking about that. I'll be definitely following up with you all. And if you're able to spread the word within your respective networks and reach out to folks on Capitol Hill to share that this is an important bill that you believe needs to be passed. I think it's really helpful for other people, particularly in leadership, to know that this is a priority for Senator Casey. Ultimately, the bill would need to go through committee and then get marked up. I think there's some maneuvering we can do there to maybe bypass some of these processes, but ultimately it has to get through committee. But I think being able to have a strong showing of support throughout the state, we're hoping to be able to make it bipartisan because we've already seen bipartisan interest in the bill before. We've had senators across the aisle who say this is a great idea, of course. So I think that we are on a great start already. So just having your support, writing members of Congress saying, hey, we should pass this bill would be a great help for us.
Thank you very much. Does a twin bill have to be passed in the House or?
Yes. So yeah, well, I believe we have some folks who who have expressed interest in introducing like a companion bill in the House. So be on the lookout for that. Again, of course, reach out to me, our office, to stay in the loop. We'll be having information regularly updated. I ensure that anytime if the bill gets passed or there's some sort of progress, we'll definitely be talking about that throughout. So our website will have updates.
And once the bill is passed in the House and the Senate, will the funds be placed in the Department of the Interior, who controls the battle?
So the bill is going, so the jurisdiction is through NPS.
And then my last question is, how can members in the community in Adams County, where Gettysburg is, across the Commonwealth and in the Mid-Atlantic region, since it is a national treasure and not only a Pennsylvania site, how can we participate in the advisory groups or follow the public hearings or the public input? What will be that process?
Absolutely, yes. We have written in our legislative text, again, it's not finalized at this moment, but part of the advisory committee, part of its work is that it's required to release information about its meetings. It has to have public meetings. It has to share the information about the public meetings with the public. It has to release information about any decisions that it's making about the exhibit in the Federal Register. There has to be a public comment period. So we want this to be an exhibit that truly is developed with the public involved. We do not want this to be solely an elite, top tier, exclusive, closed door process at all. We want it to be fully community engagement, all stakeholders involved.
Well, please count on us with our monument website, monumentpaus.com, to list your monumentpaus.com to list your public process, the status of the bill, the upcoming public hearings and meetings, and as we continue through our series, Making Monuments, will provide periodic updates to our constituents about the progress. What do you think the timeline is?
For introduction?
No, ma'am. You kind of give us a realistic tempo. I know a bill takes a very long time to pass through both the House and the Senate. What would be a realistic timeline before a piece of art? We also know that it's a public bid process once the aesthetic approach is done. Are we talking 3 years, 5 years? What, so that we may set our expectations?
I think that's a good range. I know that we are hoping to talk to folks about what those expectations could be and should be. because we don't want it to end up being something that if we get this bill signed into law by the end of this Congress and then it takes, it ends up in the bureaucratic hole, just sitting there for a while. We want it to be, okay, get this done, completed within X amount of time, but how quickly is that possible? Honestly, it's very hard to say, especially with COVID, a new administration. We don't even have our Secretary of the Interior confirmed yet. So it's very difficult to decide, to determine what are going to be presumably Secretary Holland's new priorities. What is that going to look like? How is that going to shape what this bill looks like in the ultimate frame of things? I don't think it would be hard to get this bill passed, but I think with COVID and with the new administration, I don't want to give any firm timeframes for now. I would probably say, let's check back in the middle of the year and see how things are looking. Yeah, and that's when Biden seems to be feeling very confident about turning the tide on the pandemic. Hopefully, maybe we'll be able to talk about it in person.
Well, thank you.
But, yeah.
So thank you very much. So we're going to watch the development of the pandemic, the progress of the bill in the House and the Senate, the installation of the new Secretary of the Interior, the public meetings in Gettysburg, the Artists Hall, and those of us who have been working on monument projects know that it is a rigorous process, and patience is one of the most important elixirs in the equation. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's very exciting news, and we'll be looking for those updates. And please count on us through our website and through our public process of engagement to keep your constituents and our constituents, and give the senator all of our thanks and kind regards for carrying this important initiative forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, please stay as long as you can. We know you have a very full agenda. So sometimes monuments are huge things that dwarf us in their grandeur and capacity. And sometimes monuments are intimate things. Sometimes they are places that we stand in the shadow of, and sometimes they are places that we rest upon. It brings us to our next guest from the Toni Morrison Society and their monumental project of intimate spaces across the United States called Bench by the Roadside. Welcome, Craig, to this Chautauqua, and we're excited about you talking about the Toni Morrison Society, the Bench by the Roadside, and the various and unique communities that they're in. So I'll turn the floor over.
Thanks, Lenwood. Good afternoon, everybody. I guess I'll give a little introduction about myself, then an introduction about the project, and then I'll briefly just show some slides to kind of give context for some of the events that we've had. I'm an associate professor of history at Delaware Valley University in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. I'm also on the board of Eden Cemetery, which incidentally has a bench by the road too, and we can get to that later, which is a monument in its own right, and also has a 1919 monument for World War I soldiers, by the way. I'm on the board of the Germantown Mennonite Historic Trust and have done exhibit design, docent work, and discussions, and also an article recently on the 1688 protest that the Mennonites and Quakers were involved in against slavery, and kind of leading all the way up to the Juneteenth festivals of Germantown. But just a little bit about my background. One last piece which kind of connects me to the project was that after graduate school at Temple, I was hired at the Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission, along with the African American Museum, to do a statewide project on Pennsylvania African American history. And so that is the time period that I was also on the Toni Morrison Society. And I think we were all researching and writing together with this project, so I ended up kind of segueing into the society that way. But I'll give you a little history and background of the project now as well. So the Bench by the Road project is a memorial history and community outreach initiative of the Toni Morrison Society. The project was launched on February 18th, 2006 on the occasion of Toni Morrison's 75th birthday. The name Bench by the Road is taken by Morrison's remarks in a 1989 interview with World Magazine, where she spoke of the absences of historical markers that help remember the lives of Africans who were enslaved, and of how her fifth novel, Beloved, served this symbolic role. So she said in that interview in 1989, there is no place you or I can go to think about or not think about, to summon the presences of or recollect the absences of slaves. There is no suitable memorial or plaque or wreath or wall or park or skyscraper lobby. There's no 300-foot tower. There's no small bench by the road. There is not even a tree scored, an initial that I can visit or you can visit in Charleston or Savannah or New York or Providence, or better still, on the banks of the Mississippi. And because such a place doesn't exist, the book had to. So actually, that also is very interesting and can lead to further discussion about the book as a memorial itself and commemorating the legacy of enslavement and beyond, and agency before and after of African American communities. Because the Toni Morrison Society wanted to be a place where scholars and readers could, through their engagement with Morrison's novels, because it is a literary society first, so this is an interesting piece of how it transitions into a historical project. Remember not only slavery, but also many of the forgotten moments in African American history. The Society also chose, when it was founded in 1993, a Bench by the Road as its organizational motto. The Bench by the Road project extends the Society's mission. While there have been several notable African American museums built in American cities since the mid-1970s, and wonderful memorial projects such as Charles Blockson's push to re-envision the public landscape of Philly with African American state markers, and the recent installation of the Octavius B. Catto Memorial, as well as the Your Commonwealth Memorial Project in Harrisburg. The goal of the Bench by the Road project is to create an outdoor museum that will mark important locations in African American history and the African diaspora, both in the United States and abroad. To date, the Toni Morrison Society's Bench by the Road project has installed 26 benches along with accompanying historic plaques at sites across the United States, Europe, and the Caribbean. These symbolic markers are meant to publicly acknowledge the many stories of both tragedy and triumph within the African American and African diasporic past, from the struggles to overcome both slavery and segregation, to the spirit of African American agency and innovation, to the insistence on dignified and hallowed grounds for their burials. From the placement of the first bench at Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, which was placed in conjunction with the National Park Service, to the Society's upcoming bench placements in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as we work for the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission, with the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission commemorating several stories of the Tulsa Race Massacre, and also our upcoming bench placement in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in honor of the old 8th Ward. The Toni Morrison Society's Bench by the Road project is intentionally set out to reimagine the cultural landscape of public memorial making and commemoration. Benches have been placed at sites such as Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, Paris, France, Gettysburg, Mississippi, Oberlin, Ohio, Fort-de-France, Martinique, Nyack, New York, Atlanta, Georgia, Lincoln University, Oxford, Pennsylvania, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Walden Woods and Concord, Massachusetts, Adrian, Michigan, New York City, where we had the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and History at Harlem, the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., George Washington University in Washington, D.C. at the Lisner Theater, and fairly recently at Frederick, the first free home of Frederick and Anna Douglass in the North. So I will share here my screen and just show briefly some of the bench placement images here. Do you guys see that in the background? Does everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the initial bench placement, and the initial bench placement was actually a placement for Toni Morrison herself. It was a uniquely designed bench that was given to her on her 75th birthday. And this bench would become symbolic as the project would move forward with the bench project forward. is a bench at Oberlin. Another quote about Toni Morrison that I just shared with you recently from Toni Morrison. This is Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, when the first bench that was placed after the symbolic bench given to Toni Morrison, along with the National Park Service. And we've really had collaboration with small and large groups. It's always been a community organization and grassroots at its heart. But there have been a lot of collaborators from states to the federal government to localities and municipalities here too. Also placed on Sullivan's Island, South Carolina here. And we also have benches placed in Oberlin, Ohio. There's a lot of thematic areas for the Underground Railroad, burial grounds, civil rights acts, all sorts of different large and small, well-known and lesser-known events. Some events that have already had markings with state markers or commemorative National Register markings or potentially sculptures. Other places that are absent, from that. Some places that have a built environment, other places that don't. So it's really been all over the place there. And so you can see here, Miss Morrison herself was involved with the project. She was it was really interesting how she was part of the Toni Morrison Society. It was a literary society, but I believe, from my interpretation, the fact that she was not only a scholar and an author, but also a professor and a literary critic and an editor, allowed her to be connected to many of the same people, friends, and also critics who started the Literary Society in the first place in the early 90s. They love to say, and Carolyn Denard, the founder of the society, loves to say they did that before her Nobel Peace Prize. So they love to say that they actually, didn't just do it for the Nobel Peace Prize. It was a living author society, and it was would hold events at the American Literary Association. And she was involved. I mean, she was friends with, or acquainted with, or supportive of the society as a literary society, and then the historical program that happened after it. Freedom Schools in Gettysburg, Mississippi. In Jackson State, Margaret Walker was commemorated. And also we have a number of historically Black colleges and universities, Howard, Jackson State, Atlanta University, as well, in Lincoln University in this group. And in fact, at Lincoln University, there's several benches. So at first in Oxford, PA, the Hosanna AUMP Church reached out to us, and the Hinsonville farming community. The thought was to commemorate the Hinsonville farming community as well as the Hosanna AUMP Church. And Lincoln, of course, is part of that story, so it was folded in there too. But later, Lincoln University itself, just as a specific bench, similar to Howard, was reaching out just for the history of the school, and kind of commemorating the history of the school. This is a mural in Paris, and this was some pictures of the event in Paris when that event went. By the way, we're also on Toni Morrison's 90th birthday, so it's quite simple. What would have been her 90th birthday? So that's pretty serendipitous that's actually today, by the way. And today? So, yes, today would have been her 90th birthday. Yes. So this is the Concord Schoolhouse, and Cesar Robbins. The story of Cesar Robbins is another not too far away in Walden Woods, which was dedicated to Brister Freeman, who's actually mentioned in Walden, written about by Elise Lemire, who's a historian who wrote a book called Black Walden, and kind of tried to get into the African-American community of Walden. He and the community was actually mentioned in Walden by Thoreau, but very little has obviously been discussed. And so in Walden Woods, there is a commemorative bench and plaque to Brister Freeman and his apple orchard, and life-giving, sustaining apple orchard. And that comes after this Concord, the moving of the Concord schoolhouse here in Massachusetts, along with the Cesar Robbins house. and both National Registry work that was commemorated along with this particular group. This is at George Washington University with the Lisner Theater, and the Lisner Theater was first integrated after World War II. So the story was about African-American veterans groups who helped integrate the theater in part. Let's see another picture here after the ceremony. We had a ceremony within inside too, and this gives you kind of a better close-up view of a plaque. And actually with this story, you can even read it here. Ingrid Bergman was outraged by the theater's policy of racial discrimination and said she wouldn't perform there. And so it was kind of a combination of white advocacy, but certainly prior to that, of course, the backbone was African-American advocacy for a long period of time to desegregate that theater. And it was an African-American veterans group along with Ingrid Bergman. So a very fascinating story that desegregated the Lisner Theater at George Washington University. We also have the Atlanta congregation. Let me see here. Sorry, the First Congregational Church of Atlanta. I'm sorry, that you see here, which was Maynard Jackson, John Wesley Dobbs, and Andrew Young's and Anna Cooper's congregation. And Mitchellville was a wonderful reconstruction story in South Carolina and Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, and a story of a reconstruction community that was thriving both before and after the Civil War. And so, you know, I know I could go on for a really long time. I probably should stop sharing because
where is this? Where was the last bench?
Oh, this is actually in Martinique. This is for Aimé Césaire in Martinique. So this was a bench that was placed in Martinique. We had one. The Guadalupan bench was actually for Guadalupan Louis Del Grey, revolutionary, who that one was connected to Paris. So we kind of had the bench in Paris, even though it was a connection to Guadeloupe. But this was a specific Caribbean story in terms of the placement with Aimé Césaire in Martinique here. So let me see if I can move forward. I don't want to take too much of your time up. I don't know how much more time you have. This is Eden Cemetery. So here we are right at Eden Cemetery, right? And this bench actually has been moved. We have a number of benches that will, you know, get moved over time too. And just like any kind of potential monument or memorial, this was moved a bit over where from this site right now, but it is at the entrance at Eden Cemetery. And so there's obviously Lenwood, lots of connections there with Pennsylvania African American History, with your Commonwealth Monument Project, Francis Ellen Watkins Harper, and others, Octavius Catto and others, of course, who are buried at Eden Cemetery. And we had a wonderful event out at Eden Cemetery. The Girard College Children's Choir sang at the after that event was over, or during the event at the cemetery. And then we had an event that evening at the African American Museum as well. This is actually the current location of the bench right near the entrance to Eden Cemetery.
I just want to say that Frances Ellen Watkins Harper is buried at the Eden Cemetery, and her impressive monument is there. Of course, she is one of the 4 figures in the Commonwealth Monument Project's gathering at the crossroads. Octavio Catto is buried there. He was one of the grand marshals of the Grand Review of the United States Colored Troops in Harrisburg, along with Thomas Morris Chester, who is one of the figures in our monument, William Howard Day, who was the keynote speaker, who is one of the figures in our monument, and Jacob T. Compton, who marched with the 25th United States Colored Troops down Commonwealth Avenue in Pennsylvania. So all 4 of the figures of our monument are connected to the stories of Eden Cemetery. And we are very, very excited that we have been selected as one of the 2021 sites for the placement of a Toni Morrison bench. And Greg, I am so excited about that. Can you tell our colleagues about how a program applies for, and what is the criteria, and what is the selection process? We are so excited about being selected as a global heritage site.
You know, we started out as such a small kind of little engine that could project, and I think we still are in many ways. And we had a kind of your standard email lists and your mailing list for society members, a website that has a link to the project itself. We're really moving into another stage of the project where I think we want to take it into a more sustainable and I don't know if I should say, I don't want to say professional because we're professional, but it's been very grassroots up to this point in terms of, you know, kind of a little bit of word of mouth as much as it was intentional in terms of telling the stories, having people apply. We have a panel of literary experts and historians who are on the bench committee that review applications that come in. And the criteria is really African-American agency and historic context. I mean, it's really, you know, for better or for worse, it's kind of an everything project. There's also a piece of Toni Morrison and Toni Morrison and the memory of Toni Morrison now and the legacy of Toni Morrison involved in the project. We've had some, you know, overlaps clearly with Toni Morrison themes and thematic literary themes, but I think that even Miss Morrison herself said that she wanted to kind of keep it historic, you know, kind of keep it as this grassroots memorial history project. And it's not to discount the kind of large and amazing relationships that we've made on the way, you know, with the federal government, with state governments, with local municipalities, with school boards, with curriculum design in schools in plenty of different cities that are simultaneous with our project. But as of now, it's really just connecting to the website. You know, it's kind of old school, connecting to the website and to the Bench by the Road page on the website, which gives the criteria, has the application information. As I mentioned, I think we're really looking at reevaluating right now where we are in terms of moving forward and what that means for the future. So we're in lots of talks at this point, and a lot of work is going on behind the scenes to look at how we move forward with the project. And again, one of the pieces of that is sustainability, not only with the sites, which we still have to some extent, but also it'll be from everything from criteria to selection, et cetera. It's a very unique project. It's a private project essentially, but it's had these private public hybrid, you know, connections.
And you'll be doing a book about this site?
We will. We're writing a book on the first 30 bench placements. So we're in the process of doing that right now. Yes.
And we will be very proud that we are one of those 30 bench placements that will be in the new book. Our Toni Morrison Bench by the Roadside will be dedicated at the Irvis Equality Circle site of the monument on April 27th at 3 p.m. So please circle your calendars and we'll be sure to reach out. We will be one of those 30 national and global heritage sites, and it's a great honor.
And Lemwood, I wanted to say that I don't think we think that we are reinventing the wheel here. or that, I think our thoughts are we are just one small project trying to reimagine the landscape of African American memorials in this country. And that is really, I think, the driving force behind the project.
The bench there, Greg, will give us an opportunity for an intimate place for people who visit the monument to sit and reflect upon its history, reflect upon the old 8th Ward and the Underground Railroad, the struggle for the 15th and the 19th Amendment, or just pause, as Ms. Morrison said, and have a moment of peace and reflection. So we are very, very grateful to be accepted into the national network, and equally grateful for you to share this incredible network of peace places across the United States and the world.
Thank you. And we're excited as well. And Carolyn sends her, Denard sends her regards to everyone here today. And we're looking very much forward to that event.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We'll also be excited to connect the stories of Eden Cemetery on one side of the state with the stories of the capital at Harrisburg, where Francis's full life figure will be standing.
And lastly, Lemma, that is one of the amazing things about the project, but I think with all of our projects here is the overlap that we always see, the thematic overlap. So
thank you very much, Greg. Appreciate it. So speaking of networks and systems of engagement and the connecting historiography and the narrative, our next guest is Kelly Summerford from the William Goodridge Freedom Center in York, Pennsylvania. And they're at a very important point where their monument to William Goodridge and the Underground Railroad is coming into its being and preparing for its installation. And I'm really excited to welcome Kelly Summerford to the Chautauqua table. And you just have to unmute yourself, Kelly.
Okay, hello everyone. Is the person from the library there who could start the PowerPoint? Hi, I'm Kelly Summerford. I'm the manager of the William C. Goodridge Freedom Center Underground Railroad Museum. And we are located 123 East Philadelphia Street in York, Pennsylvania. And before I go into the monument that we are creating of William C. Goodridge, I want to tell you a little bit about who William Goodridge was. William Goodridge was born enslaved in Maryland. He came to York about the age of 6, and he was indentured. He went on to fast forward. After he was released, he learned how to be a barber, and from a one-chair barber shop, he built the tallest and most important emporium in York. Now, that significance in its own is great. But he became one of the wealthiest men in York as a result of that. And we thought that because he was the most notable African-American citizen in York in the 1800s, that he should have some sort of monument outside of the house. The museum is William Goodridge's house, and it was the house that he used in his work as station master on the Underground Railroad. I will add that he was significant in so many other areas. And if we want to talk about 6 degrees of separation, we have to look at Francis Ella Watkins Harper. Francis Harper actually stayed in his home. So there's always a connection when we want to talk about history, particularly African-American history in Central Pennsylvania area. If we go to the next slide. So we thought that there should be some form of monument in all of York City, there is not one African-American monument or African-American statue, and this will be the first. Our sketch, we started off, we just had an idea of what we wanted, and we started off with a sketch, and our artist is Gary Castell. He will be the one actually creating this for us. And I think that we wanted to encapsulate all of his business, everything that William Goodridge did, and he did many. I personally have been William Goodridge persona for the past 15 years. So I have a special feeling towards this man. If we go to the next slide, please. In this, we wanted everything there. And in this part, when we decided we would do the bronze statue, we wanted to represent everything. And our artist decided that he would put a few bottles on a crate because William Goodridge Emporium sold just about everything. One of the important things that he sold was oil of Celsus. And oil of Celsus was believed during that time that if you would put this oil on your head, on a bald head, similar to mine, that it will grow. Your hair will grow. Well, William Goodridge sold that product not only in his emporium, but in 15 other druggists also sold his product. So we wanted to make sure that we represented that part of his business as well, because it was a huge part of his becoming wealthy. We can go to the next slide. You will also see that we wanted to have something there that represented the Underground Railroad. So his hand is on a lantern. And in William Goodridge's museum, his house is an area in his house where the enslaved were actually kept. And we wanted something to represent some kind of light moving, and which is often used when you're talking about the Underground Railroad. Lanterns are often involved. So we wanted to add the lantern to the monument as well. We go to the next slide. Underneath his feet, he will have a trap door. Now, the trap door represented a hiding place that William Goodridge hid the enslaved. So now you can see where we're kind of going. This is not just a man sitting on a bench. Oddly enough, we're talking about a bench as well. But it is also representing all the things that William Goodridge was noted for in York. So the artist put a trap door there. And we thought that was kind of cool because who would have thought that that is a way to indicate a hiding place during the Underground Railroad in something that's outside? That would be public art. You move to the next slide. This is just a miniature look of what it would actually look like. It's not quite the maquette, but similar to the maquette, which we will see in the next slide. Next slide. I didn't circle other things that was part of William Goodridge. Now, there are going to be changes here because he just finished this maquette for us, and I have some changes that I want made to it. But you can't see in his pocket are scissors. And the scissors represent him being a barber because that's how he started his work in York. He was a barber. And like I said before, he turned a one-chair barbershop into the tallest and most important emporium, actually buying out the chair that he worked in. That was his first shop. He bought out his employer. And on the right side, your right side, his right side, it would be, this would be stage left. The way we're looking at it is a daguerreotype camera. William Goodridge's sons were noted for being African-American photographers, one of the first, and quite famous. In fact, their photographs are traveling the country as we speak. And in the museum, we do have a Daguerreau gallery, and it is probably the only Daguerreau reproduction of a gallery in a facility that it once was in the world. So we're really happy to have that as a permanent exhibit. But everything that you could possibly think of is represented on this bench. And it's funny that we had no idea that in Harrisburg, I'm also working with the Monument Project in Harrisburg, that we would be part of the Toni Morrison bench project. So we have a bench. And the whole concept was that people could sit beside William Goodridge and of course take selfies with him and be memorialized as a person to have visited the museum. Next slide. This is the house. This is an idea of what it may look like when you visit the William Goodridge Freedom Center Underground Railroad Museum. This is a townhouse, and it was the townhouse that William Goodridge used on the Underground Railroad. And the bench kind of fits in a nice little place underneath the window, far enough away from the streets that we won't run into any problems there. And his marker will be there as well. There is thoughts of actually having the lantern lit with some kind of lighting element. But we thought that putting it all together, that is the best way to represent York's most notable African-American in the 1800s. And we're really proud. The other thing, when we were going to talk about funding, this is going to cost us about $80,000. And when we first started off, we were talking about fundraising and how are we going to raise the money, knowing the difficulties that we had with raising money for the Monument Project in Harrisburg, considerably a lot more money. We were trying to do unique things. Of course, we had fundraisers and all those things that were working. But we also had a board member who said, look, I am really, really getting tired of raising this small amount of money. How are we going to get $80,000? And the gentleman was so nice to say, well, you know what, I'm going to take this project on. And I have to say, I have a good board of advisors, and they have been very instrumental in how we move forward. And if you don't have a good board, chances are your projects won't get off the ground. But this gentleman decided, look, I'm going to give $10,000 and I'm going to get 7 of my friends to get $10,000. Now, not everybody has friends who can reach into their pocket and give $10,000. I know that, but more than that, I liked his initiative by saying, I will start first. And a lot of boards are there just to be board members and want to get into the programming and want to get into the intricate things that really don't necessarily satisfy what the director or the manager needs. Within 3 days, he had 4 commitments. Well, that meant we had $50,000 in 4 days. And I am happy to say that the commitment from the other 3 people is in. And our project is really, really on the way, which is why we were able to get the maquette done and why we were able to start moving forward. We expect the Goodridge Monument to be installed completely in 2022. And of course, we're going to have an unveiling of that. And hopefully I will get the opportunity to invite many of the people who are on this call as well, and to visit the museum. It probably is the only museum of its kind where the person was born enslaved. He owned the property. The property was used on an Underground Railroad, and it still stands. So you are standing on history when you walk into the William Goodridge Freedom Center Underground Railroad Museum. And what this is going to do for York is going to put York on the map for all the other things that they have, because York probably has all of the United States history. And we all know that Articles of Confederation were written in York, which would make it the first capital of the states. But if everything goes to plan in the early part of 2022, the William Goodridge Monument will be up.
So we'll have to come and sit on the bench there.
You have to come sit on a bench, take pictures. We are also members of the National Underground Railroad Network of Freedom. Thank you, Randy, for your help on that. We are also members of the International Coalition of Sites Conscious. And I think we are the only two so far anywhere close. And the other one is in Gettysburg, Seminary Ridge, if I'm not mistaken. But we are moving forward. We are still open, even with the COVID down. I will only do tours. You have to call in, and if it's only 2 or 3 people, I will give a tour. But because of COVID, we have really shut down a lot of our tours. I have to say, last year we had for a house tour, for a house museum that is not well known, I think we had something like 2,200 people that were coming through from 48 different states. We've had people come in from Hawaii and Alaska as well. Everybody wants to know about the Underground Railroad, and we are a living museum, which means I actually give the tours. Sometimes I will be William Goodridge, if you could afford me. And other times I am just the manager giving tours. But however you get a tour, it is always a good tour. We have been getting wonderful responses. And we have civic engagement programs there. We've had programs like Martin, Malcolm, and Mandela. I had living history interpreters to be all 3 of them. And they were able to talk about the common bonds, common threads that bind them. We've had Lydia Hamilton Smith and Thaddeus Stevens there. We've had Frances Ella Watkins Harper, and we're going to bring her back since she is so important now. But this monument project is a big thing for me. I'd like to think in the end, William Goodridge would look like me, but I don't think that the artist is going to do anything. It's going to help me out on that part.
Thank you so much, Kelly. This is an exciting project. It's also exciting to hear of all the many ways monument projects get funded, that a coalition of 8 individuals wrote checks for this project. It's also a life-size figure, and we're following that theme of life-size figures this evening. You can sit monuments that are in the human scale that you can relate to, that you can respond to.
Yeah, Lynn, what we specifically wanted human size. We didn't want a heroic type thing. We have a lot of paintings and things of that nature that are larger than life. He will be life-size, and like similar to what we have here in Harrisburg. And that is a new way of doing things, and I think we're pretty much pushing it.
So we started the Chautauqua talking about the Gettysburg Battlefield and an African-American monument right on the battlefield. And I have to remind you all that there is no such thing as a battlefield. That's somebody's farm, somebody's town, somebody's churchyard, somebody's marketplace. You know, the battle erupted on common grounds, on public places. But the unique top-down model of a federally sponsored bill and resolution that has to be passed in the House and the Senate and placed in the interior was a model of that Gettysburg piece. We then moved to the Toni Morrison, an intimate, personal set of now 30 benches across the nation, across the world, built from the literary and poetic imagery that she spoke of. We then moved to a private-public partnership in a historic house that brings the monument to the front door of the place. Our next colleagues are from Wilmington, North Carolina. We've looked at the battle. We've looked at the Underground Railroad. We've looked at the passage of the 15th Amendment in Harrisburg. Now we are going to explore the role of the African-American men who rose out of the resolutions to the Emancipation Proclamation that opened the United States Army to men of color, the United States Colored Troops. And we transport ourselves to our dear friends, Heather Wilson and Stephen Hayes at the Cameron Museum in Wilmington, North Carolina, to speak about their United States Colored Troops multiple image monument. Welcome, good friends. It's great to see you all again.
Oh, thank you, Lenny, and thank you, Kelly. We are so honored to be here. If someone from the library could share our PowerPoint, awesome. You guys are amazing. So Lenny's been to our site. We're in an odd situation. We are an art museum that happens to have been built on a historic Civil War site. So adjacent on our property, there are the remnants of these earthworks from the Battle of Forks Road. We have the last vestige of Federal Point Road, which was the road that the United States Colored Troops marched up to the battle. And so when we built the museum here in 2002, we met some USCT reenactors. And in 2005, they helped us to understand that we needed to do something with the site, and we started hosting living history. But we knew that we needed to bridge that gap between the art museum and the historic Civil War site. We know that art is a common language that we all share, and we believe that art can connect people across lines of difference. And so it has always been our dream to be able to engage an artist like Stephen, a contemporary artist, to reflect on the events that took place at the Battle of Forks Road and to create a work of art that is dynamic and that our visitors can engage with. Now, Lenny knows more about the USCT than I do. But I can tell you that these men, there were 1,600 men that fought at the 1,600 USCT that fought at the Battle of Forks Road. They were from the 1st, 5th, 10th, 27th, 37th regiments, and the 5th led the charge. They, of course, took the brunt of this engagement. They had to march first into battle, and they had to march last into the victory march into the city. Because Wilmington fell, Wilmington was the last lifeline of the Confederacy, the last seaport. Because of the Battle of Forks Road, Wilmington fell, and we believe at the Cameron Art Museum that that was really the end of the Civil War. And so we We know that 80% of the USCT were from the South. Many of the men who fought at Forks Road were from our area. Many of them stayed and settled, and many of their descendants still live in Wilmington. So it was important to us to create a sculpture worthy of these men. So I'd like to introduce you to Stephen Hayes, and he can talk a little bit about the project. He can talk about it so much better than I can, but I wanted to give you the background. We are so excited that his new work, Boundless, will be unveiled November 13th, 2021 at Cameron Art Museum. Can you click to the next slide, please?
It's so exciting to see a date, you know,
I know.
after your long struggle. Yeah.
So, Stephen, do you want to talk about this?
Can you hear me good?
You're perfect.
Welcome, Steve, and artist amongst us. Yeah.
How's it going, guys? So what we are doing, we're going to be creating is 13 life-size statues of the colored troops that marched through Wilmington. What I ended up doing was telling the Cameron Museum that I wanted to cast the faces of descendants and reenactors to be a part of this monument. So I want to have these life features that were passed down from generation to generation. So I ended up casting a little over 14, about 18 people. I'm ended up using just 11 of those people that I casted for the sculpture, for the faces of the sculpture. They'll all be life-size. They won't be on a pedestal. They'll be down on the ground so that people can walk up to it and look eye to eye with each soldier.
Can you move the slide forward?
So on the other side of the statue will be all the names of the troops men that marched through Wilmington. So it'll be a relief sculpture on one side, but on the other side be a flat with engraving of the names of all the soldiers.
Can you move to the next slide?
The drummer boy and the flag bearer will be in the round, but the last 9 statues will be half. So this is the process of what I did to end up creating the sculptures to create the faces for each sculpture.
Can you move to the next slide?
It takes about a 45-minute process for me to cast a mold of each person. They came and set. I did 18 in one day, so I probably started around 11 and ended, I don't know. I think I probably started around 10 and ended around 8 o'clock.
And can I just say, we had 10 appointments and then more people came. Everybody wanted to be cast for this sculpture. And there was one young man who is a descendant on both sides from the USCT. He had two ancestors on each side of his family that were USCT soldiers. And Stephen was on his feet for 12 hours. It was incredible.
So I feel like it was very important for me to create that, to bring the family into this part, because it's not for me. This organs for me is for the family and the people that live in that area. So I wanted to use their features because these features were passed down from generation to generation to put inside this monument and not just make a face out of thin air, you know?
Stephen, what was it like as the others stood around?
So that's a first for me, because I normally do, when I do these bust molds, I normally do it just me and the person, because I feel like this is a very intimate moment. Sometimes these people they might not want to be in there, be super nervous. So I was kind of put on display because I'm more of a, I kind of keep to myself, and when I create the artwork and I make it and then I put it out there, I don't make it in front of people so they can be, seeing how it's done. I feel it was a new experience for me.
It wasn't what we expected. Could you show the next slide? I think, yeah. So people came and they brought their family, and then they didn't leave. They just wanted to stay. And I think Stephen has that type of presence too. But it felt almost like a spiritual experience. It was, as Mark says, it was this moment, right, where Stephen would ask people to imagine as they were being cast that they were one of these USCT soldiers. And it was emotional. It was, and Stephen is so grounded and steady. It was, we didn't expect people to stay either, but it was really powerful.
So this was event art. This turned into event art. And did the families know each other? Heather, did they share stories while they watched?
Some of it was, so there was one family that brought multiple cousins and they all knew each other. But then there were some people that traveled from New Bern, and, you know, so there were a lot of different, there were groups that knew each other and then other groups that didn't. But yes, they talked and shared stories. And we also had multiple veterans that were cast. So a couple of Vietnam vets and a young man who was a Marine vet that was cast as well.
So one of the last thing that was that's also gonna be a part of the monument, there's gonna be a sound piece also added with this monument where you'll hear the footsteps of each soldier marching and hear their cadence and the songs that they sung while they marched. So I feel like it was important to bring this whole thing in around where you hitting all senses, where you hear it, you hear what's going on, you hear them moving, because these guys, they weren't riding on horseback or anything, they were marching, they were, you know, one foot in front of the other to where they needed to get to. So you wanted to, what kept them, I want you to hear what kept them going, what kept them wanting to fight for, you know, the freedom of their bodies. So so that's also what's going to be added to this monument, the sound.
Can you show the next slide?
Some of the faces that we used.
And the next slide.
What did you discover about your own work, working in this such a public process, Stephen?
I don't really know how to answer that question. So for my own work, my work deals with capitalism, consumerism, and brainwashing, and the ideas of the Black body. But this work is, I mean, it's my work, but it's not for me. This is for, you know, I remove what my personal work is about to create what for this moment. Or most.
So this was a different way of working for you, a different.
So I do bus molds. I do a lot of molds of people. So that's kind of the same. But as far as doing the body and the round, I've done that before, and this is like more of a. I have an installation called Cash Crop where I did the bodies and the round, everything all the way around. So this is me putting fabric on the bodies. The Cash Crop exhibit was just plain bodies in the nude. This one was me adding the cloth, making it look like these people are actually moving, because I wanted them. When you look at the feet of the statues, you see that they're in stride. Their foot aren't planted straight on the ground. They're in stride. They're in motion. I'm creating this motion, this movement. So I felt that was important. That's kind of what's different from like most of all my artwork that I've been doing personally, because most of my work is just standing still, but I'm creating this movement with the work.
I think that's one of the things that we loved about Stephen's proposal. He was from the beginning captivated with the movement of the USCT and the sound of their footsteps on the ground. In these shoes that, you know, they didn't have very nice shoes. I mean, Lenny, you know more about this than I do, but shoes that were old and falling apart, and that they had marched miles and miles and miles in. And I think Stephen's interest in showing that motion really was compelling to us, and that forward motion. There's a way in which Stephen's work is about the past, the present, and the future, because he's casting these descendants and the reenactors who are the story keepers, and also some veterans as well. And all of that, I just think, is beautifully metaphorical.
Outstanding.
I think there's another slide. I can't remember how many I put on here.
And here's our drummer boy.
And I think there's a couple more. Oh, that's a good one. Stephen, you want to talk about this?
So this is them at Carolina Bronze, where they cut each sculpture up to turn it into the bronze. So this is it as the wax mold right now. So these are, you can see them in the background, they're all getting gated. So basically they'll take this wax mold, this wax of the sculpture, and then they're going to make a ceramic shell of a ceramic mold of it, which is called a lost wax process, where they melt all the wax out of the ceramic shell, and then they'll go back and pour the liquid bronze inside, which will then be these sculptures, will be the actual sculpture, and then they'll weld each piece back together. So,
and Stephen, our monument to the 15th and 19th Amendment is the lost wax technique. It was really interesting to watch every stage from the sculpture. We were very heartbroken, Stephen, when the clay sculpture had to be, cut up, and then the wax, and but each stage gave itself up, I will say, to the next stage and step in the process.
Yes, it's a process. It's a long process, as far as, like, I make it, and then they take it and they make a rubber mold of it, and then they take the rubber mold and they turn it into wax and all that stuff. So it's a long process, and this is going to be a big project because it's 13 statues. Oh, I'm sorry, 11 statues that they're doing. So I think we have 2 more to go. I have 2 more in my studio right now. I got some students working. I teach at Duke as well, so I have some students in my studio right now working. I would take y'all over there and see the other 2.
Yeah, we watched. We fell in love with the sculpture, and then it became the mold, and then the wax, and then the bronze, and then the pieces had to be put together again. Then we had a kind of Frankenstein-looking figure that had to be sanded down and patinaed, and you all are a STEM and STEAM education course, because every stage of science and technology is used to create the thing that we see and we assume just suddenly appeared on the horizon. But this is a remarkable piece. We applaud you, Stephen, for what is an exquisite work, and also applaud you, Heather, for the diligence, the integrity of the museum, the diligence of the process, particularly doing Katrina, listen to me, I'm still in New Orleans, during COVID, I measure all catastrophes now by Katrina. So, during COVID, and it's really wonderful to see that November 21st, I will be there, mask and all, to see this piece come to life. We are going to have the websites of all of the projects at the end of this presentation, but we now turn to the point of our Chicago, which is called Animating Democracy, where we look at the intent, the content, the construct of public works, and of navigating and negotiating the public landscape as artists, commissioners, and communities come together. And we've invited Nathaniel Popkin to present an article that those of you who are here as audience, we have circulated an article amongst all of the presenters today, and many of you who are in our audience also. And we've asked Nathaniel, as a thought leader, and you as change agents, to dialogue and discuss this article, which touches upon so many aspects of the negotiation of public space. So with no further ado, I'll introduce and invite Nathaniel to the Chautauqua table.
It's great to be here, Lenwood. Thank you for inviting me to hang out with you all and hear all of these remarkable projects. And those of you who are also panelists, I'll be calling on you as we go forward over the next few minutes, just to help think through some of the issues that this particular project that is going on in Brooklyn, in downtown Brooklyn, brings about for us, those of us who think about the negotiation of people, place, and history in the public sphere, particularly in an urban context. That's what we have here. So the article that Lenny referred to is a New York Times article from a few weeks ago about, I guess, conflict around the intent to install public art that that connects to the story of the Underground Railroad and the African-American historical presence in the neighborhood of downtown Brooklyn, to the design of a new park called Willoughby Square Park. And the inevitable, perhaps in this day and age, because of the way things are so often handled at the community and municipal level, failure of the initial process to bring about a satisfying monument for this project. And so I'll talk for a few minutes just outlining what that's all about and where the conflict comes into being, and then we'll open it up. And I'll, before I start, I'll say what are the things that frame this story for us are questions about monumentality. All of you guys have talked about so far very intimate human scale projects that themselves are acting as monuments, but of course monumentalism is something we think that ought to be on a grand scale. One of the commentators in response to the proposal at Willoughby Square Park said this should be something that rivals the Statue of Liberty because of its historical import, that is the site of the Underground Railroad in and around that neighborhood. So can we think about that? Can we think about the way cities change and neighborhoods change and how you go about installing a marker and what is the nature of a marker? And then finally, how do we think about this issue of figurative and abstract? And we'll talk about, maybe we'll start with that because the proposal, so let me go back a few moments. So downtown Brooklyn, there's a sort of mayoral directed project to install a new park in downtown Brooklyn in an area that was historically an African-American neighborhood in Brooklyn, but which has been nearly entirely obliterated by gentrification. And so when you look at the streetscape around the proposed park, you see all new buildings and you see a commercial fabric that has essentially erased the legacy fabric of that neighborhood, you know, something that would have looked something along the lines of Kelly, the house in York, Pennsylvania, at least from that era, right? So that's been wiped out. The city, under the direction of Mayor de Blasio, is setting about to create a whole new, a whole new school of monuments across New York City. And he, you know, with folks saying, well, he wants to imprint himself onto the city and every mayor is entitled to do that. So this is part of that. And so an artist was asked to design a monument to the historical African-American nature of the neighborhood. I'm not sure it was particularly towards the Underground Railroad history of the neighborhood or the fact that Ida B. Wells lived nearby, or the sort of Frances Harper of New York, that is Sarah J. Garnett. And I say Frances Harper of New York, Garnett was, I think, the first African-American principal of schools in New York City, but their lives were basically in parallel, synchronous from the 1830s to, they both died in 1911 and were both active abolitionists and suffragists. So Sarah Garnett, Ida B. Wells, and then Underground Railroad house in the neighborhood of Harriet and Thomas Truesdale. So all of that says an artist is chosen, a young Black woman who had been a public school teacher. Her name is Camila Janan Rashid, and she had been hired. She has been commissioned by the city of New York to install art into this park. Now, here's an interesting thing that's happened. She was chosen. She has a record of creating sort of text-driven art, contemporary text-driven art in the public sphere. And the interesting thing about this, that's nothing strange about that. That's great. It's going on all the time. And I think there's lots of reasons to think why that would be wonderful. In addition, she's being asked to install and design and install a monument as the park itself is being designed. So here we have this remarkable situation that, unlike almost every case, in this case, the art, the monument, the memorial, the commemoration is embedded and integrated into the design of the park itself. And that is a remarkable set of circumstances. But as it turns out, one that seems to have been blown, according to at least some folks who live in that neighborhood, who feel that the proposed monument does not do justice to the history. And in fact, the proposed park, which is a park on top of a parking garage underneath, where one community resident notes used to be tunnels for those being sent to freedom through the Underground Railroad, is now a parking lot, and above which is a rather anodyne design for an urban park by a firm that does sort of boring landscape architecture. So many issues here, from design, from urbanism, and the way that layers of history collect in an urban space and the way they're erased, the question about who ultimately gets to say what the monument is about, to the question of figurative versus abstract. I think we could go on. And so I guess I want to start by putting this out to, well, let's put it out first to you.
Nathaniel,
Yeah.
can I ask you one more question though?
Yes.
Describe how the community responded or not to the chosen artist, because there's one thing about us going through this whole process of selecting an artist.
Yeah.
There's another thing about that artist engaging with the community where the piece is going to be. So just fill that last piece in before you open up.
Absolutely. And I should say it's not entirely clear. The New York Times article was short and it was missing elements to it. And in my research to find out a little bit more about it, I haven't been able to uncover much more than that there was a public process of some kind to select this young Black woman as the artist. I don't think she's from the neighborhood, but she is a New Yorker. And someone took her proposal and reviewed it, and the city okayed it. But to several folks who have been involved in the keepers of neighborhood history, or the keepers of 19th century history, the keepers of Black history in that neighborhood, felt as though they were, their work, their scholarship, their desire to preserve that history was overlooked in the process. And so they reacted rather strongly. And I would say part of the reaction was to actually get a building that very likely was part of the Underground Railroad preserved as part of the ultimate project of building the park. So they were successful in that. But ultimately, I think they're right now in the process of really saying, hey, wait a second here. Let's put the brakes on this. Let's get underneath the hood a little bit and understand how this woman and how her project was chosen. And I would say also the New York Times did a very, very poor job describing this woman's art. And I think we may be doing her a bit of an injustice by, it's labeled in the article that, excuse me, it's like she's installing plaques with some writing on them to delineate this or that as part of the history of the neighborhood. my sense is that is a very poor interpretation of what she proposed, that it is probably in a contemporary art vernacular. It is probably in Black vernacular. It is probably in a bold and temporal kind of canvas that she is proposing to do, but the newspaper called it a kind of like plaque system within the park itself. So I can't say I'm sure about that.
She is a Doris Duke Fellowship winner and an Andy Warhol Fellowship winner for contemporary art. So this is no plaque maker. This is a serious, significant artist with a check. Heather, you know, she's got her first check for the commission. You know, she prepared a maquette, and the community wholeheartedly rejects her work. Herein is the dialogue that Nathaniel wants to bring forward about the role of the artist, the right of the artist, the role of the community, the negotiation of public space, the imprint of the mayor. There are so many things that we should think about.
And so I'd like to open it up, and I'd like to ask, first of all, Kelly, I'd like to ask you, who, in this sense, who you think this proposed monument is for, and who gets to be the author of it?
And you need to unmute. And Nathaniel, I will say that Heather, Randy Harris from the African American Historical Society of South Central Pennsylvania, Craig, Kelly, several of our colleagues that are listening have read the article and reviewed independently to me, and I thought it would be great for you to knit their responses. Denise Berger from the Colored Conventions have all read this article, and so there should be pretty robust.
Well, I will make what I have to say very simple. You know, when I read the article, you know, you're dealing with history, and a lot. I think that her artwork is definitely more appealing to millennials and tweeners and those individuals who are there. But I'm a 40, almost a 50-year member of Screen Actors Guild, and I have to go back to how we take the liberty in films to depict a person. For example, Harriet Tubman. A lot of the younger people are going to only know about Harriet Tubman based on that piece of art. And if that piece of art doesn't represent everything, every part of Harriet Tubman, they leave the project believing that Harriet Tubman is Cynthia Erivo, who played Harriet Tubman in the movie. So we have to balance something when it's real and when it's abstract, because something does get missed in the process. So my only thing was that I didn't like how they went about determining which artists, and did they give the artists enough of what they really wanted to the artists, to the artists. But very often, I mean, as a older person, our history then becomes whatever piece of artwork that is out there. And that's not necessarily good enough all the time, because even coming into people who come into the museum, they look at Harriet Tubman, those who have seen the Harriet Tubman movie, they look at that piece of art and that is who they believe Harriet Tubman was. So that's my discrepancy. And I don't know how anybody else feels about that little piece right there. But I think her target audience is younger audience.
And I guess if that's the case, and you have an artist who has a practice, I wonder how where does the artist exist in this? Stephen, I want to ask you this if you're there. You know, where does the artist show up in this, and where does the community or the wider city show up in this? And how does that get negotiated? Stephen, you referred to that a little bit in your in your talk a few minutes ago, that this wasn't really your work in a certain way, it was different. And so how do you negotiate that?
And Stephen, just before you answer, for those of you who have not read the article, the artist chose an abstraction of Harriet Tubman and an allegorical Underground Railroad statement, not a literal or a representative. Could you unmute, Stephen?
Sorry.
No.
I think it's important for the artists to sit with the community and the stakeholders to understand what they're looking for and what they're asking for, because you don't know. I mean, I don't know what if she did or not, you know, but you have to sit with the stakeholders and see what they're interested in. I had a few different drawings. I think we went through like 3 or 4 different drawings until we landed on the one that we wanted. So at the end of the day, you have to talk with the community. You got to see, because I live in Durham. They're in Wilmington. I'm not going to drive by this every day, but they're going to drive by this every day. It's the communities. It's not mine anymore. So at the end of the day, you got to talk with the stakeholders. You got to see who's involved. You got to say, hey, look, this is what I'm interested in doing. What do you think about it? I mean, I got a commission piece. Somebody's asking me to do something for them. I done made like 4 or 5 maquettes, and they were like, nah, that's not it. That's not the one. I'm like, okay, back to the drawing board again. So it's just like, you have to play your part and work with the community and the stakeholders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd love to brag on Stephen just a little bit. Actually, I'll go back just a little bit. So Stephen he was very patient. He made multiple drawings for us, because every time he gave us a drawing, we took it to our stakeholders. This sculpture, the Cameron Art Museum is funding it through the donations of our community. We are representing what our community wants us to represent. We are telling a story that they're invested in. So, every time he drew a new drawing, I sent it to who we call our story keepers, the USCT, but also to the African American Historical Commission of the city, to different aspects of the community. And then when we finally had it narrowed down to what we wanted the sculpture to be, Stephen led an amazing community engagement talk at the museum. We had people who drove from New Bern, they drove from Kinston, someone who drove from Raleigh, because this story was so important to them. And he navigated these different opinions and questions. We had people who didn't agree with each other in the audience. And Stephen navigated that so beautifully, because I think Stephen has always said that this project is about the people. That's why he wanted to represent the descendants' faces. This is about representing our community. I don't know what the process was for this project. I did read the article. I can tell you, I don't know how familiar you are with Wilmington's history, or if you have seen the New York Times book, Wilmington's Lie. But Lenny, I think when you came to visit, you went to see the 1898 memorial, which is a very controversial work of art, because it is an abstract work of art representing what was and for those of you who don't know, it was basically a white supremacist uprising that happened in 1898, where 60 African-American men were killed, and then many African-American families were run out of town. At this time in Wilmington, we had a thriving African-American merchant class, and many African-Americans in politics. And this changed the landscape of Wilmington definitively. And we are still dealing with the repercussions. They burnt the African-American newspaper. And so there was a big commission that came together for the 1898 memorial sculpture. And after it was put up, I think a lot of community members were like, wait, what is this? It's 16 giant paddles. What does this mean? And then a lot of plaques. And that's not what we wanted. But I will say, it depends on what you think the job of art is, right? If art you know, sometimes we need art to push us in a direction, or to make us angry, or to make us upset, or to make us ask questions. You know, the role of art isn't always just to be beautiful or uplifting or to engage us. So sometimes an abstract work of art can challenge us in a way to see things in a different way. So that's, you know, it depends on what you bring to it, right?
Yeah, Heather, I'm so glad you brought that up, because, you know, I can think of several sort of abstract pieces that have been installed here in Philadelphia in the last few years that are very, very powerful, such as Hank Thomas's Afro Pick, which was initially installed right next to the now removed statue of former Mayor Frank Rizzo, a white supremacist. I can think of the Stoops, Caitlin Pomerantz's project, where she installed stoops in a very important public park, stoops that had been reclaimed from buildings that had been lost to either disinvestment or gentrification. And so both of them had a really powerful sense about them. But I think perhaps they were also both very intimate. You could sit on those stoops. You can go up and touch the Afro Pick. And it relates to, I mean, it's an object that people carry in their pockets. It's like, it's a real thing. And so I wonder, like, Craig, maybe you can talk about, like, what is the magic of the intimate in the monumental?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, I was thinking of a lot of things while we're talking, and all these other connections, because Wilmington, just on an anecdote, has George Henry White, who then eventually leaves and goes up to Philly and is also buried at Eden, by the way. So there's so many, and forms Whitesboro, New Jersey,
yep,
among other places. But you know, I was thinking, the last thing I was thinking about when you were just talking before getting to the question of the monumental was other abstract pieces. So I was thinking of the Mural Arts Project. I was on a panel a few years ago for the African American Mural Arts Project, the Albert M. Greenfield African American Mural Arts Project collaboration from about a decade ago. And there were some that were abstract, you know, as well as some that were literal or something in between. With the bench project, there's several things here. One, there's the figurative piece of Toni Morrison that's always there, always hovering in the process. It's a literary, thematic, intellectual kind of like umbrella that's over the project. The physical, the literal part is the bench, right? I mean, that's pretty common and standard practice. It's not unusual. I mean, it's interesting that, you know, Kelly was talking about that earlier too. It's a very intimate, I think, very tangible, and has been throughout time, you know, way for memory and way for memorializing historical moments or events. There's questions with our own project about, will we maybe even look at sculptures in the future, you know, in terms of like having the benches kind of have something more of an aesthetic or not. You know, we've had discussions and debates about that, just kind of bringing you into our living room. But I think the common denominator is the community. And, you know, Heather, you mentioned it a lot. Many people here have. Kelly, you know, the stakeholders and Stephen, the stakeholders, the community members, you know, our project, in spite of everything we do, is still about the communities themselves and what the communities want. It's a little bit easier to kind of describe that way, a little bit less aesthetic in a way, so to speak, kind of more like a state marker program where you're just, the power of the words matter, you know, the power of the words next to the bench matter. So I think it's a really fascinating debate about the monumental and what deserves monuments. I'm thinking about the Shirley Chisholm monument, the Maya Angelou monument out in San Francisco. I think was similar kind of controversy, so to speak, recently about, you know, what depiction should be there? What depiction does the community want? What depiction can an artist represent and think that that's okay, that it's okay to be abstract? And lastly, yeah, is there a generational thing here? Are we also speaking to a new generation, and how do we do that? You know, full circle, I guess, if you're going past something that doesn't look like it represents what you want it to represent, you know, are you teaching? You know, are you teaching the community? But I think it's really a catch-22, because I think you want to be there is an aesthetic there, you know, as well as that literal kind of and powerful teaching moment.
Exactly. And, you know, you spoke to something very important here, which was, you know, what's supposed to happen with this? Is it meant to teach? Is it meant to signify? Is it meant to awaken? Is it meant to create controversy? Is it meant to be provocative? I think of the Caddo Monument in Philadelphia, which is actually monumental in size. It's not life size. And it is created while people were lining up, for example, to vote in early voting. There was, you know, lots of people talking about how they would walk by the Caddo sculpture and high five him, or think more deeply, because there's a ballot box right there in that monument. So there's a chance, like, I think there's a chance for some things to happen that I guess the artist or the planners or the community may not even be able to control or envision how things might go. And I kind of think that's the most wonderful thing of all. I think it's more challenging, and I don't know who would want to speak to this though, when you install something such as the Commonwealth Monument Project installation or this project in Brooklyn, which is in a gentrified space, a park that's being built from the ground up or below ground up. You know, how do you install something that's been removed? How do you install it back? And
Nathaniel,
yeah,
both Denise Berger from the Color Conventions Movement and Randy Harris from the African American Historical Society wrote responses to this article, and I'm wondering if they would share with you what their responses were and incorporate your question, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think I have their responses here, but it would be better if Randy or Denise would, you know, talk through it.
Randy, do you want to start?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Denise, feel free.
No, I'm really inviting you, seriously, because I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts now that we're in this forum.
Well, what jumped out at me was the story was so superficial in that it didn't describe the territory, the physicality of the space, so that I can understand as a reader from a distant community, this notion of the parking garage and the levels on which it was built and the proposed park on top of it. And also, I'm always curious about legends and mythology about Underground Railroad and tunnels. So I was wanting to know if you could speak to what evidence is there that there were tunnels that somehow were part of this, you know, the standard escape route notion, and why weren't they not preserved in a community years ago when that original construction was built?
I absolutely agree. I had a similar set of questions, and I mean, I guess it's kind of silly to say, why is it taken this long? But it also struck me as curious that these conversations, unless that was just not commented on in the article, were just being held now, right? What were the efforts? Is this a kind of a backwards looking response, which when you're dealing with gentrification, depending on when you decide to start having the conversation, can be a lot of symbolic noise, but not necessarily something substantive that's actually generative.
I think that's a great comment, and I feel like that's probably what's in play here. It's like, whoops, we've erased this, but we can't let that happen entirely. And I do feel to a certain extent that that's why this project feels disconnected to those who have been trying to preserve history of the neighborhood for so long. They feel like that's exactly what has happened, Denise. I think you're entirely right. But I wonder though, given the fact that there's been such a level of gentrification there, and I mean, here we are having this thing being built from the bottom up. And of course there is this strange irony of the tunnels and the digging a parking garage, which is very painful to consider, really. But what is possible in that situation when you are sort of working from a point of erasure, but wanting and needing and yet authentically perhaps wanting and needing to signify. What's possible in that situation?
Well, I can give another piece of history, Randy. So there was a community organization that's been working with the National Park Service's Network of Freedom to vet this site. And they are the ones who encouraged the city to put a monument there in the first place. But the project was kind of swept away from them as the mayor got this notion as he took down the Confederate monument that he would gain ground by replacing it with a contemporary monument. So there was a level of the community organization, Greg, going through the rigorous process of vetting an Underground Railroad site with the National Park Service, going to the city for help, and then losing the momentum of their own project as this redevelopment project took over.
Did they lose their momentum or were they steamrolled? Because it feels as if there's more than one option on the table. And I think that could change the way we think about this all as well.
Well,
I
you know,
suspect they were
I'm always
steamrolled.
trying to be a diplomat. They were steamrolled, you know.
I suspect that's correct. I mean, this mayor has a reputation for that, and he was on his own mission. You can read between the lines in this situation. This was taken away from them, as is so often the case. You know, when people have been working at something for decades, and then all of a sudden the reality around them has changed, the political reality has changed, and they get left behind. This happens even in New York. So it's really an interesting situation. But Lenwood, I want to ask you, like, what's been the response to the Commonwealth Monument Project? This is an installation in an empty space that in part and in good measure is to commemorate or bring back into the consciousness a neighborhood that has been razed altogether. And so how does that work?
Well, you know, Nathaniel, it's always easy to say we when you mean I, but you know, like we set out to build a statue. You know, it was supposed to be on the riverfront where we were cultivating a sculpture garden. Then we decided that the site wasn't appropriate. So we went searching for a site, and we discovered a sign that Frederick Douglass had spoken on this corner in 1859. So we decided to put the statue there. Then we discovered that the neighborhood was a thriving African-American enterprise zone that was wiped away through eminent domain. So we thought we need to honor the neighborhood some way. Then we put a list together that had several men and women on it, and we got down to 4 names. And the committee decided, why do we have to do one statue? We should do all 4. And so the narrative about the 15th and the 19th Amendment came to be. Then we discovered that the lawn was the K. Leroy Irvis lawn, and Irvis was the first African-American Speaker of the House since Reconstruction. Then we discovered that it was the Speaker of the House of Pennsylvania who voted to end Reconstruction, and that the lawn was an act of reparation, you know. And so the monument grew out of the deep research and the dialogues with the community. It kind of grew beyond what our original vision was. And it became a corporate project in the best sense of the word corporate, that the ownership extended beyond the commissioners. And we set out to build a $180,000 project. It was a $550,000 project by the time we ended. We set out to make it on a little pedestal, The pedestal became an orders lectern, and the lectern became an iconic pedestal with 100 names, and the 100 names led to the search for the descendants of that neighborhood. And, so it really took over us as we continued the civic dialogue with the community. It is much more than I ever dreamed it would be. And you know me, my part was glue to try to hold the coalition together and try to keep in the reins, but it's so much more than even the 22 members of the committee envisioned. And the community now, my favorite thing is to sit on a bench at the shopping mall across the street and watch people drive past it, park their car, jump out, take selfies, go back, call their neighbors and bring them back down. You know, it's now an historic marker that is well beyond our dreams. So,
You know, that I'm sorry to jump in, but I was just thinking that it kind of does speak to the tangible over the abstract in that sense, because the same thing happens with the Caddo Memorial downtown. You know, it's not just Caddo, but it is that segmented streetcar. It is that ballot box. It's all of those things that people tangibly go up to and touch and feel and experience and want to have a photo with. So it is a really interesting discussion, but it does kind of make you wonder about the abstract here and what is the, you know, what's the role?
And now, Craig, people say, meet me at Cato. You know, right. It is now a GPS place for gathering and reunion. You know, it's a free ground. It's a common ground. So. Nathaniel, we've gone beyond our time, but I would love you to close this conversation about the article and the deeper issues that it brings up to any of us who are negotiating public space and bringing artists and community together around public art.
Yeah, I would just say real quick, I mean, I want to thank everyone for everyone's like really insightful thinking on this issue. I mean, you sent it out, Len, with the article to a group of people because it clearly was demanding a kind of response. It was opening a space for conversation, and I hope that that's what's happening in Brooklyn right now. I don't think we can be assured that that's the case, but it well may be. So in fact, what happens is there is a space for conversation because someone has tried to do something, and that is not a bad thing. I would say it really brings to the fore questions about who is community? Whose history are we talking about? Who gets to do the signifying? What is the role of the artist? What responsibility does the artist have to the community and the community to its own history? How do we take into consideration the fact that we're always living in a changing, every place that we're talking about it, whether it's Wilmington, North Carolina, or York, Pennsylvania, two cities that probably are well aligned in history, actually, they are always changing and they're never stable. That's just the nature of even small cities. They're always evolving. And so how do you reckon with that? That is, a community is never someone's community. And if it is, it's only for a certain amount of time. Time changes. So, and then I would add to all of that, how do we think about the act of monumentalizing something when we have very conclusively thought amongst ourselves, at least, that the intimate, the personal, the human is what connects us to ourselves, to our community, and to our history. So this has been it was genius of you to send out this article because it certainly has awakened a lot of thinking. And I'm glad I was able to be invited here today to do a little bit of that. And we can continue.
We will post this article on our website, monumentpaus.com, monumentpaus.com. And we'll ask those of you who've joined us as audience to go to our website and download that article. Nathaniel, thank you so much for guiding us through this conversation, and all of our presenters. We created a jargon and the vocabulary of thought leaders and change agents. The presenters are our thought leaders for this evening. All those who you have joined us and observed this to talk or the teaching table are our change agents in your communities. Go stand by some monument in your community. Look at it, think about how it got there, why it got there, who it belongs to, who its stewards and its caretakers are. We'd like to thank the library. The Dauphin County Library System has honored us by naming their new Welcome and Research Center, the Thomas Morris Chester Welcome Center. Chester is one of the 4 life-size figures of the monument. And we will continue our Lyceum in Chautauquas on March 18th, Thursday, March 18th, from 4 to 6, in a workshop called Finding Thomas Chester. Chester lived in 5 major cities in the United States. Each of those cities has collections of a part of his history, and we were inviting the archivists and curators from 5 collections to join us on that evening and share their part of the Chester story through articles, artifacts, and memorabilia. So please come back and join us. Until we see you again, we'll see you at the crossroads. Be safe, be blessed, and thank you very much for a great conversation. Be well. Now we're going to put up the websites of all the folks that spoke tonight, so you can do 2 things. You can contact them, and hopefully in your generosity, you can make a contribution to their programs and to their monument projects. Thank you very much, Dauphin County Library System, and special thanks to all the great presenters this evening. With that, I'll say good night, stay warm, stay safe.